In the meantime, I do see a few folks that you may not realize it, but your video camera is on. And we do have a very large amount of people registered for this webinar, so the more videos that we have running, the less bandwidth we have. So if you do have your video camera on, I'll ask that you please turn it off on your end. We don't have any need for video on this webinar, so please just double check that your video is not running. You can turn your video off by locating your name under the participant list and just hitting that little video camera icon.
Vonzell, I've just turned your mic on. Could you try speaking so we can make sure we can hear you? Vonzell, can you try speaking again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, great.
All right, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. Veronica, if you want to get us going.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Veronica Buckwalter. I'm the co-project director of the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. And welcome to today's webinar titled Creating a Warm and Engaging School Climate to Support Student Attendance. Before we begin, I just want to share a couple of brief details with you about the webinar. Today's webinar will last for approximately 60 minutes, and that does include some time for questions at the end. We have placed everyone on mute upon entry into the webinar. I'll ask that you please do not unmute yourself. This creates a very unpleasant experience for everybody involved. Don't want to hear dogs barking in the background, babies crying, sirens wailing. So if you could please just remember to keep your line on mute, we would really appreciate it. If you do have a question throughout the course of the webinar, we'll ask that you please use the chat function, and you'll find that in the lower right-hand corner of your webinar screen. All questions can be directed to Dantel Proctor, our host and presenter, and she can forward those to the presenting team as needed. If we don't get a chance to get through all of the questions that you submit, we will keep a record of all of the questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get back to everybody within the next week or so to make sure that we answer everybody's questions. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to all registrants within the next 7 days, and it will also be posted to the National TA Center's temporary website. A link to this website will be provided to you through the chat function at the end of today's presentation. All right. So the webinar is one of many offered this year by the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. This is a National Technical Assistance Center that was launched back in 2016, and it's funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend school every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate with high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Now, the two communities of practice that I referred to in the center's mission are focused on the 30 national My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor sites and the many SIG and SIG eligible schools throughout the country that are working to implement early warning system programs to address chronic absenteeism. Although we've run into several unanticipated delays in launching our formal Technical Assistance Center website, we are moving forward on this. We are making progress and anticipate that site going live in early spring. So be on the lookout for announcements about the launch of the website in one of our upcoming newsletters. So today's webinar is being presented by Annie Lineberger. Annie has worked at the intersection of health and education for over a decade. In addition to serving as Special Projects Manager with AttendanceWorks, Annie's in the process of earning her doctorate in public health from the University of California, Berkeley. Before joining AttendanceWorks, Annie served as the Director of Special Projects in the Superintendent's Office in Fontana Unified School District, located just outside LA. She worked as a district administrator at Chicago Public Schools, where she led the Department of Student Wellness. Annie has worked in several local and international organizations that address health disparities including the Greater Chicago Food Depository. She's originally from Chicago and received her BA from Middlebury College and her master's degree in public policy at the University of Chicago. Annie, I will pass this webinar over to you, and if you need anything regarding your slides, please just let Dantel know. She has control of the slides as you move forward, okay?
Great. Thank you so much, Veronica and Dantel, and also to the National Student Attendance and Engagement and Success Center. We're so pleased to participate today and to be able to present on this topic of school climate, which is so critical for student attendance. So I'll just quickly review our agenda for the next 60 minutes, which includes a review of key concepts about chronic absence, a discussion of the relationship between school climate and attendance. We'll be introducing our new Scan of Environment for Attendance tool, or the SEAT, which we're really excited about. And you're getting sort of a front row seat, no pun intended, to learn about. And we'll talk about school practitioners' experience using the SEAT, and then have time for discussion between each one of our presenters today. So to get us started, we'll just do a quick review of what is chronic absence, which is probably familiar for many of you on the webinar today. Chronic absence is defined as missing so much school for any reason that a student is academically at risk. And at Attendance Works, we recommend using the definition as missing 10% or more of school for any reason. Chronic absence is different from truancy, which really looks only at unexcused absences, and it's different from average daily attendance, which looks at only how many students are sitting in their seats every day. And it also includes suspensions. Chronic absence can be really easy to miss if we're only looking at consecutive days of absence. If you think about it, 10% of a school year is about 18 days of absence, which is a lot, but then when you break it down across a school year, that's just 2 days a month. A lot of times, parents and even teachers may not even notice if a student misses 2 days of class every month, but when it happens month after month, it becomes a problem. Research shows that frequent absences from school can be devastating for a child's future. We know that kids who are chronically absent in preschool, kindergarten, or first grade are much less likely to read at grade level by third grade. And those students who can't read at grade level by the end of third grade are 4 times more likely than proficient readers to drop out of high school. By high school, chronic absence becomes a better predictor of school dropout than test scores. And this is a really important moment in time for us to draw attention to this metric and to deploy the time and resources that students and families need to make sure that kids get to school every day. As many of you know already, the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ActESSA, replaced No Child Left Behind. ActESSA requires states to report on chronic absence, and it also gives states additional flexibility to select accountability measures. One accountability measure for school quality is chronic absence. And as of the end of 2017, 36 states plus DC have included chronic absence in their ActESSA plans as an accountability measure. So there's really an unprecedented amount of attention being paid to chronic absence and to the drivers of missing too much school. This gives us an opportunity as practitioners to transform the way we've really thought about attendance traditionally, typically which has been more about compliance and about punitive measures, and to start to think more about how we can best understand and support the needs of our students and their families. So how do we actually make that happen in our schools and our districts and our communities? Chronic absence is really an indicator that something else is going on in a student's life that's preventing them from getting to school every day. The drivers about why kids miss too much school can really vary widely by student, school, and community, and it's up to those schools, districts, and communities to do an analysis of why of the underlying causes of chronic absence. At Attendance Works, we think about the drivers being grouped into 4 categories. Faulty beliefs, like people not realizing that missing 2 days a month can really affect student learning, and that sporadic absences aren't a problem. It can also be because of barriers, like a lack of access to dental care or health care, poor transportation, or housing instability, which we'll hear a little bit more about today. It can be about negative school experiences like bullying or ineffective disciplinary policies. And finally, we think about lack of engagement, like no meaningful relationships with adults in schools or lack of engaging and culturally relevant instruction. For climate in particular, we think that lack of engagement and negative school experiences may be really indicative of issues with school climate. So today on our webinar, we'll be exploring what are the opportunities to strengthen climate in your school or district to promote attendance. For example, do you need to look at your attendance or your disciplinary policy, or how student relationships with adults may influence attendance? At Attendance Works, you may know that we promote a three-tiered intervention model where Tier 1 represents low-cost school-wide strategies that support attendance among all students. You'll see that school climate is first on this list because it's fundamental to efforts to encourage and maintain attendance for all students. Tier 2 is for students who are moderately chronically absent and includes more targeted strategies to help individual students overcome barriers to getting to school every day, like addressing health concerns or partnering students with caring mentors. And then finally, Tier 3 includes the most intensive interventions and is targeted to students who are severely chronically absent, missing 20% or more of school. Tier 3 often requires an interagency strategy and may trigger a legal response. So today, as you may have guessed, we're going to be largely focused on Tier 1 strategies to address school climate. And I'm so pleased to welcome our panelists, Bobby McDonald of Cities Neighbors Foundation and Vonzell Reid from Oakland High School. Before I introduce Bobby, who's going to start us off by talking about the relationship between school climate and attendance, let me just remind you to ask questions via the chat box for Bobby and Vonzell. We have about 5 minutes for questions with each one of them at the end of their presentations. So without further ado, Bobby is currently the Executive Director of City Neighbors Foundation. She's a founder and served as the first board president of City Neighbors Charter School in Baltimore, Maryland. She was selected by the Annie E. Casey Foundation as one of 16 leaders from across the country for the Children and Family Fellowship. Bobby taught early childhood education and kindergarten in 2 university child development laboratory schools and served as literacy trainer for Head Start and the Children's Literacy Initiative. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'd love for you to tell us more about your experiences with school climate at City Neighbors and how you see that it connects to attendance.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with all of you guys. So City Neighbors is a network of 3 schools in Baltimore, Maryland. We serve a little over 850 students, K through 12. I'll tell you a little bit about our population. 64% are African American and 30% white and 6% other. We're up in Northeast Baltimore, which is an integrated community. We have about 25% special education students. And, you know, we're a full inclusion school, so that's a really important part of who we are. 50% across our 3 schools are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and our attendance rate is 95%, and our chronic absence rate is 7%. You know, City Neighbors was started by a group of 17 families, so it's a grassroots organization, and it has a high level of family involvement. In Baltimore, the schools are, charter schools are a citywide enrollment with no entrance criteria. So we really draw students from all across the city. You can go to the next slide. So when we started City Neighbors, we really had an idea of creating the best school we could imagine. And to do that, we started with seeing every child as unique and creative and worthy of the deepest respect. And then we started to design our school based on that question. Next slide. And the question that we used is, what would it take for every student to be known, loved, and inspired? Next slide. So you know, it's really a passionate question because often schools aren't asking all of that to make sure every student is loved and inspired and known. And so we came up with a lot of components to answer that question. For City Neighbors schools, you know, we do project-based learning, arts integration. We're inspired by Reggio. We're a family teacher cooperative model. But one of the things that we've really had a chance to focus on is our school environment. And so this is the lobby of the high school. Our students are greeted at the door every morning by our school leaders by name. They know everyone's walking in. And there's a measure of belonging. You know, the student portraits that hang in the lobby is another way of helping our students feel that they belong. And also just giving attention to the environment to make it warm and inviting so it doesn't look like a factory or a hospital, but really feels like a place that is of comfort and care. So this room right here is part of our advisory model. We call it POD. The entire high school is split into groups of 16 or 17 kids, and they actually all have a space like this, similar to this, that is our way of making sure our school has a socially embedded model. So every child belongs to a family within that school where they are known by an advisor. And that pod stays together for 4 years. So they actually graduate together. And in this picture, what you're seeing is some student desks. There's always a living room in the pod area and kind of a little kitchen area. But the idea is that each child is known as an individual, and that way, when someone's not at school, you know, we can just give them a quick call on their cell or call their grandma or mom or dad or whoever it is, because they actually really are missed. So the kids are in there for a little over an hour, 5 days a week. They're in their pod. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of our attention to detail, this is, you know, how the bathrooms look at City Neighbors. And just a quick story. Last year, in one of our bathrooms, you know, we never, hardly ever have vandalism because the environment's so nice and the kids keep it nice, and we asked them to help us with that. But last year, someone was angry and someone kept punching a hole in the wall in the bathroom, and we would fix it, and then the hole would come back again, and we kind of had an idea of which student it was, you know, and we were trying to kind of help him out to figure out about that anger. But we also put a punching bag in that bathroom, a stand-up punching bag, and with a little sign, you know, if you feel angry, punch here. And that was the last time the wall got a hole in it. But that kind of individualized response to students and working with them is something that we care passionately about at City Neighbors. Next slide. So this is our kindergarten room. We start with a play-based model. And the reason we do that and we push that idea of social emotional learning all the way up through 12th grade is because the way we measure school climate, one of the ways we measure it is by the level of independence our students show in the building. And it's really about them building that internal control. And so we have to practice that with the kids. And it starts, for example, in this space for the kindergartners where they have workshop times, they have different areas to go into, and they learn to work together. You know, instead of putting up a sign of how many people can be in each area, we ask them to count themselves and say, when are there too many people in this area, and how do we know, and how will we work that out? So it's that kind of level of building independence. Next slide. One of the things that we really care about is showing the work that students are doing, and this is a documentation panel that shows the work of first graders as they were studying bulbs. And the positive aspect of documentation panels is it's surrounding the children with a strong sense of valuing their work and that their work is important. So we're not just putting up the A papers, we're putting up the thinking that students are doing. And that creates a culture of, you know, intellectual curiosity. And because we have such a wide range of abilities, we show that wide range as something that all is valued. Next slide. The hallways are used as extensions of the classroom. So here you see some students out in the hallways working, and we've added a lot of glass to the building wherever we could so that the teacher can do passive supervision. It also allows us to create different groupings of kids. So when you have an inclusion model and you need to meet kids where they're at, there are times when, you know, a smaller group needs to meet or an individual needs their own space. And by using the entire building, we're able to do that. Next slide. So relationships with adults obviously are super important to us if we want to make sure every student is known, loved, and inspired. And in our advisory model, even starting in the middle school, we have lots of ways that we're doing that and meeting kids where they're at. We have intensive learning periods that are a time of enrichment or support, where we break the kids up into even smaller groups based on their needs. We have grade level projects where the student will work with just one teacher or with a couple other kids on a year-long project, and it's a project of passion, so it's based on their interests. And then we have electives and presentations of learning, and all of these things are structures within the school that allow us to meet students where they're at and to make sure they're known and loved. And then just quickly, obviously, we do restorative practices, which is really not a punitive model, but each time there's a student who's broken somehow the community compact, then giving them a chance to get back into integrity and own and take responsibility for their actions. Next slide. So, you know, we engage families. This is our board of directors, and here's a dad walking his daughter into school, and here's a big brother visiting his little sister in kindergarten. We engage families as much as we can, and really it's by creating an offering to them. We have a family participation catalog, but we meet the families where they're at too. In what way would you like to be engaged with City Neighbors, and how can we give you meaningful work to do? So we have a structure of committees and volunteers that create events and times and places for the families to participate in the life of our school. You know, another thing that's important is the teachers have a lot of power at City Neighbors. They create curriculum based on student interests and needs. They can do the workshop model, which also allows for that wide range of abilities. Next slide. So this is one of our English classrooms. This teacher didn't want any desks. She just wanted the biggest living room of all time. So teachers design, as I was saying, teachers design instruction to offer multiple opportunities every day for students to read, to discuss their reading, and to meet that range of abilities and needs of our students. They're accommodated through these different structures. As I mentioned, the intensive in middle school. But also sometimes, you know, we could partner a student with just a mentor or just a specific adult that they connect with and have relationships with. So we're very flexible in that way. Next slide. So we feel like the teachers having that kind of power to create curriculum based on student interests and needs is one of the key reasons that our attendance rate is so high, because the students really are engaged in the learning, and when they're not, the teacher can find that thing, find that one thing that they really care about, or find that one book that really captures them and captures their imagination. And so we really believe in that kind of teacher empowerment. Next slide. So in order to obtain a complete and multifaceted view of our children's academic and social-emotional development, we use a variety of means to assess students' skill levels and progress. So besides, of course, the standardized assessments that we're required to give, just like any other public school, we also have informal assessments, ongoing diagnostics. Our teachers look at student work, which is an amazing way to really see where the kids are at, and also develop portfolios for each student. The students present their portfolio at a presentation of learning. So we're actually very rooted in assessment. We just have multiple ways of approaching that. And then, you know, we are an arts-based school. The arts are really not an add-on for City Neighbors, but they're an essential component to how we approach the work. And what's beautiful about the arts is that it asks children to express themselves, you know. How many ways can they express their knowledge, you know? And what it does is it's a connecting point to involve and challenge students so that they themselves can become known and know themselves better too. Next slide. This is just another picture of, as an arts-based school, what our hallways look like. And you can see here a study of the Chesapeake Bay unfolding. And this documentation panel started with just a couple pieces, and then as the students kept learning and learning, they kept adding to it to express and show other people that path of learning. Next slide. You know, the ability for a school to be flexible and to respond to the students in it, I think, is one of the main reasons, you know, that we'll have good attendance. Because if you do have a student with special needs that needs some kind of flexible grouping or some kind of accommodations, it really is up to the structures of the school to be able to identify that and to respond quickly. And no one's going to know that better or faster than the teachers. And so they need to be empowered, our students need to be empowered to express themselves, and then the families need to be empowered to ask for what they need and work with the school to get it. Next slide. Just going along that lines of empowerment, you know, this is some work that our middle schoolers did. You know, who owns the work that's happening in the school? That's one of the things we ask ourselves. You know, we've established a shared set of norms called the City Neighbors Way that includes performance values, like work ethic and honest reflection, and then social values like resolving conflict and sharing spaces. And with that City Neighbors Way, our students will self-evaluate and the teachers will also evaluate. And the City Neighbors Way is part of the reporting, you know, the report card of every student. And so it really is tied into our model that the success of our school is the academic success and the social and the emotional. And so when the kids are doing work like this, answering the question that they came up with, how do you want your class to be perceived by the teachers, parents, and other students in the community, we feel like that's when our school is really alive, when the community is answering those kind of questions for themselves. Next slide. So I hope I've given you a little bit of the picture of some of the work happening at City Neighbors in Baltimore. We're a school that is very much feeling like a family, but also has a strong ethic and, you know, culture of excellence for academics as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. Wow, that was just so inspiring, and I think it ties just so beautifully into this whole, the whole objective of our webinar today, to really make the connection between climate and attendance, and you're doing so much fantastic work. So I would encourage everyone, if you have questions, please to put them in the chat box for Bobby. We've just gotten a few so far. So Bobby, as we get questions coming in, I just wanted to start by asking, you know, teachers seem like such a central player in the work that you're doing, and they're so critical for establishing a positive climate and culture. How are you engaging your teachers and your community at large, like your parents and community members, to help create a positive school climate?
Yeah, well, you know, it's really important for our teachers to feel happy and inspired as well. So, you know, the teachers are engaged in the decision-making for our school at every level. So, for example, for hiring, we always ask, you know, who wants to be on the hiring committee? Anyone who wants to can, and then we don't bring anyone new onto our staff unless it's 100% consensus of that group. And then with the scheduling, all right, you know, what are the things that you really need to do your best work, put in your request, and then we gather with teachers and say, let's see if we can make this come true for everybody. So the teachers are engaged at, you know, including budgeting, same thing, you know, really engaged in as much as they want in creating City Neighbors and creating the school, so they are invested and own it. And then in terms of, you know, their own professional development, you know, we do everything that we can to have them identify where they want to grow. And sometimes we're sending folks out, sometimes we're bringing experts in, and sometimes we're doing the peer-to-peer approach as well. And, you know, for every new teacher, they're assigned a mentor, and a lot of really joyful learning among our faculty. And I think that that translates right into the classroom with our students. so that they too can, you know, enjoy learning. This is our life together here in school. Let's make it fun and joyful and exciting, you know. Let's eat really good food together when we do eat, you know. Let's make our schools beautiful. Let's be inspired together. So we kind of approach it that way. And the same thing with families too, giving them lots of opportunities to participate.
Yeah, that seems like such an important strategy, is really to engage the community around you in your efforts, and it sounds like you're doing a really authentic job of that. So what are the outcomes that you're seeing? You briefly mentioned your chronic absence rate, but can you just refresh our memories about that and tell us, if you know, how it compares to other similar schools?
Okay. You know, it's always, we're so not satisfied to even have a chronic absence rate. We don't want to have one at all, obviously, but, you know, that's also life, and we're in Baltimore City, and so sometimes we'll do our best with students, and sometimes it's difficult to get it done. But our chronic absence rate is 7%, and actually I'm not positive of what Baltimore City's chronic absence rate is right now, though I think someone on this call probably does know it. I'm sorry. And then, of course, our attendance rate for our high school, I think, is especially, I think, you know, the K-8s have always been super high attendance rate, you know, above 95%. But the high school has never gone below 93%. And for a high school in Baltimore City, that's a non-criteria high school, it's really unheard of to have that be true. And, you know, our special education students also have a high attendance, because of course we look at what is the difference between our special ed students' attendance and our general ed students, and it's close, which is important to us. So all of those metrics are, you know, leading us to be able to get great results with our students and families.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we just have time for one more question, and I see some rolling in, so thank you everybody for participating. I just will note that we will be able to share the PowerPoint with participants after the fact. And so Bobby, just one more question for you. Do you, what are your strategies for implementing your culturally and linguistically appropriate services standards at City Neighbors?
I'm sorry, do you mean in terms of our teachers or our students? Could you just repeat that? I'm sorry.
Sure. I think if you could answer, you know, briefly about both the strategies for implementing culturally and linguistically appropriate service standards.
Yeah. So I think part of our approach to culturally relevant is, first of all, to have our faculty, you know, reflect the students that are in the building as well. So we work hard to make sure that our staff is diverse in many ways, you know, in race and age and socioeconomic status, just like our students. And then we really have a strong stand for relevant and authentic curriculum, and honoring the diverse population that we serve and the diverse world that we're in, especially here in America. So a lot of our curriculum is based on authentic things that are happening in children's lives right now. And because we're working with the kids to develop the compelling questions, we'll have things like, is peace possible? Or, you know, what happens to the Chesapeake Bay? Or we'll just do a deep dive into, you know, what is fake news, for example, you know, whatever it is that is relevant to the kids right now based on their interests and what's happening in the newspaper is what becomes our curriculum. We'll use that. And by doing it that way, it's not being studied as we're just dropping in on one part of history because it happens to be African American History Month. It's always African American History Month, you know, because that's where we are and that's part of who we are. And so our work is really based and grounded in the work that matters to the children and families and teachers of our schools.
Great. Well, I think we could ask you questions all day, Bobby, based on the responses that we're getting from the participants, and hopefully we'll have a few moments at the end of the webinar to come back to some of them. But this is just such a great way to end by connecting what's happening instructionally to how culturally relevant experiences can really support a school climate that helps encourage attendance. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think what's so exciting about what Bobby just presented is it also tees us up so nicely to talk about our new tool at Attendance Works called the Scan of Environment for Attendance tool, or the SEAT. Recognizing the importance of school climate for attendance, we at Attendance Works have designed a tool to help you look at the characteristics that comprise school climate, including teaching and learning, school environment, safety, and relationships at your own schools. The tool is free, and it's available in 2 different versions, one for elementary schools and another for middle and high schools that really differentiate between the different climate elements for age groups at different school levels and the school structures that are inherent to those different levels. We really recommend that as users test out the tool, that you do it throughout the year to assess change over time, and also at different times throughout the school day to get a full sense of the student experience, so that you're looking at sort of the different elements as they apply at different times during the day. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how to access the SEAT at the end of the webinar, but in terms of how you would actually implement the process at your school site, first you would want to convene a team, typically your attendance team, and together you'd want to review the tool and the accompanying user guide. And I can't stress enough how important that user guide is for helping walk you through the process and making sure that everyone is in agreement about the different climate elements that you're looking for with that particular walk, and also that you are in agreement about the goals of using the tool for that particular iteration. You'd want to notify your students and staff of what's happening and why. They don't want to be surprised when you're opening classroom doors or peeking in bathrooms. Also conduct the assessment you'll hear from Vonzell. You can do it a couple of different ways, test out different ways that would work for you. And then we'd really encourage you to debrief as a team and set goals for the future. And really importantly, to communicate the results back to your school community, to both tell them what you found and also create some accountability for yourselves to actually take action to address the findings of the tool. So now I'd like to introduce Vonzell Reid, who is serving in his 3rd year as an assistant principal at Oakland High School in Oakland, California. Prior to joining Oakland Unified, Vonzell was an assistant principal in Southern California for 1 year and a history teacher and instructional coach in Chicago for over a decade. Vonzell has been a willing innovation partner for Attendance Works, and he's helped us test the SEAT, and we're so grateful that he's here today to tell us about his experiences using the tool. So Vonzell, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Penny. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Bobby, for getting us started. It was great to hear about your school, and certainly looking forward to reviewing the notes and learning more. Attendance at Oakland High School, if you could turn to the next slide, please. We have about a little over 1,500 students, 86% are free and reduced lunch, but we are the oldest high school in the city of Oakland and the 5th oldest high school in the state of California. This year, currently, our priorities are trying to develop positive relationships with our students. We want our students to have at least one adult on staff that they can say they have a positive and meaningful relationship with. In addition to cultivating those positive relationships, we are a wall-to-wall academy school, and so those programs are built to support students from their 10th grade through their 12th grade, where they will work with the same group of teachers, the assistant principal, case manager, and guidance counselor to meet their graduation requirements and to get some great real-life experience prior to graduation. Our 9th grade is set up in a similar way in that although they are not tied to a specific academic pathway. They are tied to a family that has a similar setting with teachers, administration, and a guidance counselor and case manager. And so this is our effort to build in some of that community and that family feel, so that there is that sense of support from day one. And with that, we hope to not only improve relations, but also improve our graduation rates. Next slide, please. You know, it goes without saying that, you know, attendance is definitely a growth area for us. We are grateful to see the enrollment that we have each and every year, but we know that we can do a lot more to sustain and engage students to continue coming each and every day. Whereas you see our attendance percentages for the 2017 and 18, we're finding that we're excited to see where our numbers are currently, but we know that there's a lot of work that we can be doing in the Tier 1 and even in Tier 2 interventions to support students to continue to improve their membership here, which ultimately will help them to move forward and towards graduation. We know that, you know, the more students we have on campus allows us to receive funding to maintain our programs and maintain incentives to invite students to participate in. But without their membership, you know, we can't continue to fulfill our vision. So we prioritize attendance for a variety of reasons, but mainly so that we can see our graduation rates improve over time. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that, you know, we experienced with attendance, you know, when I first got here was just the idea of having teachers submit their attendance on a timely and a consistent basis. And so we've seen significant improvement with that, and that's really helped us to better understand, you know, who is here on campus each and every day and which students we definitely need to be concerned with when it comes to supporting them and making better decisions or overcoming barriers that prevent them from coming each and every day. Some of the other competing priorities are, you know, with just dealing with time in terms of professional development for our staff and in terms of engaging them in learning about how to establish these relationships, how to support students when they do exhibit symptoms of being absent, you know, just the duties of being an everyday teacher, limited staff to, you know, convene attendance committees, and just working with the competing priorities within our current instructional leadership team and our climate and culture teams. Next slide, please. So again, some of the things that we've been doing to kind of combat our strategies, or our attendance challenges specifically, is once again maintaining positive relationships with our students and families. Within the last 3 years, we've been working with an acronym, PROPS, which is Prepared, Respect, On Task, Professionalism, and Safe. And when we see students exhibit these characteristics, we reward them with prop cards that can be used to buy Oakland High School spirit items, souvenirs, healthy snacks, as well as, you know, buy the, you know, kind of use them to avoid detentions that they accrued via being late to school. But we've seen a positive buzz with that. Students are definitely interested in learning on how to not only find ways to demonstrate the attributes of props, but also reminding teachers that when they do, that, you know, there is the reward. So we're excited about that. We also monitor the teachers who give out the most prop cards, and we know that those teachers who give out the most prop cards typically have the least amount of behavior and the least amount of attendance concerns, as we've been able to track that via the data that we've received with prop submissions, as well as just checking and correlating that with our attendance data. And then tardy sweeps. Within the last 2 years, Our case managers and our assistant principals have participated in period tardy sweeps, and our kids, although, you know, reluctant to participate, when they do hear that final bell, we do see a sense of urgency. Since the tardy sweeps, we have seen a few more teachers step out and encourage kids to come out to get to class on time, but it has been a healthy sense of urgency to get to class on time, to beat the bell, and to avoid being swept by, you know, myself or one of my fellow colleagues. Next slide, please. So, you know, I was excited to hear about the seat, and, you know, knowing that we've relied heavily on quantitative data, you know, it really didn't help us really understand other facets of what could contribute to students not coming to school consistently, and so the seat was a fine opportunity for me and members of our staff to just kind of put ourselves in the position of a student and walk our campus and look at it critically as to where we could find opportunities to improve the overall school environment. We wanted to just figure out, you know, what about our school you know, gets in the way or could create the opportunity for kids to come back each and every day. So we're concerned about the environment as well as the level of visibility and presence of adults on campus. Next slide, please. So, you know, we not having too much background with this, you know, I relied on some volunteers from our climate and culture team to utilize this tool, and so I asked them to review the instructions on their time, and we picked a date and a time to meet after that, and so we walked the campus together. And you know, that wasn't the worst experience in the world, but it felt a bit cumbersome because we realized as we were walking it that there's more than one entrance point for students to enter our campus, and so we were missing out on opportunities to kind of see the volume of students that were coming in on the opposite end of the campus, as well as, you know, what our campus looks like at that time of day during the time that we were conducting it. So in the second round, I met with a different group of people. We reviewed the seat together with the instructions. We clarified any clarifying questions that we had, but then we divided ourselves up in, you know, there were 3 of us, so we each took a different part of our campus. And here in California, our campuses have multiple facilities that require students to enter in and out each and every day. So there's not just one central location where students will enter and then make their way throughout the building. So with that, we were able to capture somewhat more positive data and data that can help us just kind of continue to figure out best ways to improve on helping students and supporting students to come to school each and every day. And so the next time that we plan to do it, we will review the tool again. We will set goals that are more intentional, and we will create, instead of just having one person take one part of the campus, we will divide the group. We will divide in teams of 3. So we'll have about a team of 9 in this next round that will walk the campus at 3 different times in the day, just so that we can kind of get a sense of what kids are experiencing and looking at in the morning as they enter. What does it look like as they transition from their second hour into lunch, and then what does it look like, you know, as we close our day out into the latter part of the afternoon, into the closing bell. After that, we will come together and just quickly, you know, use a protocol to not only just relay the facts, but to really uncover what those facts mean and how that might inform our next steps in terms of, you know, improving our facilities, or even just celebrating some of the things that oftentimes we kind of take for granted because we're so critical of ourselves in terms of what we really should and need to be doing to engage our great student body. Thank you for going back, but now you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So what did we really learn in those two trials? Well, we learned that, adults were not as present as we would like them to be. I think when we start our school year off, we always, have to start off with our right foot. Our staff spends a lot of times with building culture and climate in their classrooms, developing relationships, and part of that is seeing a high volume of staff in our hallways. But as many of you probably know, as the school year gets on, you're really focused on, making sure you got enough copies, making sure your lesson's right, making sure your technology is right, making sure, everything is ready for your day. And sometimes that takes away from the amount of time that you could be standing at the door. So we've been working with our staff as well as our security to, make sure that they not only maintain the high expectations of themselves, but also lend themselves to our hallways, which our students do appreciate. One of the things that we continue to be very excited about is that our school is clean and well maintained. Our students eat breakfast as early as 7 a.m. and they eat lunch, and there's a supper that's served, but throughout the day our bathrooms are always being replenished and cleaned and maintained so that students can utilize them appropriately and safely. When campus closes down for lunch, there's garbage cans that are deployed and recyclable cans that are deployed. So we're really excited about, just keeping our facilities intact, and we know that our students appreciate that because we hear the comments and we hear them policing each other about, making sure that they clean up after themselves and maintain the environment. The other piece that we notice is that as we see, student work and advertisements for clubs and sports and things of that nature, we also see that we could be celebrating students in terms of attendance, reminding them about the importance of attendance, and figuring out ways to better utilize our public space in terms of advertising, what it means to be to have good attendance and how that impacts the overall learning experience here at Oakland High School. Next slide, please. So some next steps for us is to continue to talk about attendance and follow our priorities and how that helps us to build and sustain positive relationships, figure out some Tier 1 interventions that we can continue to pilot and ultimately roll out. But we want to use the tool, as I said earlier, in different times of the day. When we first used it, we were only using it in the morning, and that definitely is a very telling time of our day because you can kind of see the vast majority of how students arrive, who they are the first to greet, and then, we kind of lose it if we just stop there. So we really want to track and use the tool in a couple different times throughout the day. We want to certainly consider the barriers that get in the way of students in terms of maintaining high attendance, particularly students with disability, our foster students, and students who have unstable housing. But more importantly, I think what we're really realizing is that there's a lot of opportunity in our Tier 1 interventions that can help us connect with kids, check in with kids. We're currently devising, we have 3 subcommittees within our climate and culture team right now. One of them is devoted to creating a conversation with teachers about relevant and meaningful teaching practices to just kind of touch on some of the unintended biases that come out and ultimately have a negative impact on students and their experience at school. The other one is, figuring out how to better utilize our universal referral form and when that would be appropriate to use versus when other means of correction might be appropriate. And then finally, our tardies. What is it about the tardy system? I know this conversation is talking about students who have a hard time coming to school, but we also have the challenge of what happens when students are here, and are they going to their classes and staying in their classes. So, you know, as excited as we are to see some success in terms of developing relationships and building our wall-to-wall academy, we realize we have an incredible amount of work, good work, in the Department of Attendance. And so with that being said, if you can go to the next slide, I think that's
I think we're ready for questions. Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Vonzell. That was really helpful, and it's so useful, I think, to really understand the nuances of how you actually implemented the seat and what your findings are. And it's great that you're thinking so holistically about your approach for attendance. We don't have time for many questions, but I did just want to start by asking, we got a couple comments about what the teacher attendance duties are at Oakland High School and how you've gotten teachers to be more proactive in dealing with attendance. So if you could just take a minute or two to answer that, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So the expectation for our teachers is to take attendance, you know, within the first 30 minutes of the class. And so within that first 30 minutes, there may be the expectation is that they have to go back into their grade book or their attendance record online just to adjust the attendance as students come in within that 30 minutes. But then after the 30 minutes, anybody who comes to that class has to be sent, anybody who comes to that class 30 minutes after or at the 30-minute mark beyond has to be sent to the attendance window to get a late pass. And so that late pass will be put into the system to mark that the student arrived, but arrived 30 minutes late. And so, you know, we've had some challenges with that. That hasn't been a strong expectation for teachers prior to coming, but what we've also helped teachers to understand is that that is a contractual duty, but that is also a legal responsibility because their attendance can be used in a variety of ways to support students, to protect school for safety purposes. So, you know, it's more than just counting seats and counting dollars as much as just making sure that we understand who is here and we have record of that. But this is also the beginning of helping us, you know, understand who is here versus who is not.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to more questions, but that's really helpful. And it sounds like you've also been really engaged in getting teachers involved and being more visible in the hallways. So hopefully that's useful to everyone as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you how to access the seat. Again, it's the Scan of Environment for Attendance tool, and we're really excited to offer it to all of you today. You can register, you can access the tool on our website at attendanceworks.org. You'll have to register using a SurveyMonkey link. And the survey basically will tell us a little bit about you and will allow us to get in touch with you for feedback about the tool, because we will be refining and updating the tool on an ongoing basis, at least as we get input from you initially. After you register and do the survey, you'll receive a Basecamp invitation from our team within 72 hours. And then someone from you or someone from your school district, whoever does the registration, will need to complete the account setup and download the tool and user guide from Basecamp. And please remember to read the user guide before you get started. It should really help guide you through the process of using the tool. So thanks so much for participating. We look forward to your feedback. And now I'm going to turn it over to Veronica and Dantel to close us out.
Great, thank you, Annie. And I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar today. So sorry that the links don't work inside WebEx, but like I mentioned before, the recording will go out to everybody, so you'll have the link within the recording when you access the recording, and you can just copy and paste it over into your web browser if you didn't jot it down today. So we hope you found today's information helpful and informative. A reminder that the link to the webinar recording will also be available on the National Center's temporary website. You'll find a link to that in the chat box right now. Dantel just posted it. And we will be sending the recording of the webinar out by email to everybody that registered within the next 48 hours. So please keep an eye out for your email that will include the link to the recording. Other than that, I think we are set to wrap up, and want to thank all of our presenters for a wonderful webinar, and everybody that logged on. We hope to see you on a future webinar. Thank you very much.